Harrison, we have Brad Levine, and we have Rob Russo with us. So, Kate, there's been a lot of different analysis on the temporary foreign worker program, right? Pierre Poilievre wants to get rid of it because he says it's a big factor in high youth unemployment. Other economists say youth unemployment is just a leading indicator of overall economic slowdown. And if there's an immigration stream that's affecting young kids, it's international students more than temporary foreign workers. So what do you make of the decision to go after this for these reasons when there is some data that suggests it's different things actually causing this?
Well, I think David spoke to the contrast that this can create between the Conservatives' plan for dealing with a sluggish economy and high unemployment. To your point, David, youth unemployment in some parts of the country is over 20%. This is a crisis, and so the Conservatives have come up with one proposal of several to look at addressing that. So this certainly creates some discomfort for the government in defending the status quo for primarily boomers or retirees that are comfortable. And then on the other side of that, young people or those trying to enter the workforce, which is obviously the coalition of voters that Poilievre is looking to appeal to. One other contrast that it creates for the Conservatives to take advantage of or for the Liberal government to try and defend is around organized labor. You had the Prime Minister initially respond to this proposal and say, well, I'm hearing directly from companies and corporations in Quebec that they need this program. If you're an organized labor leader in Canada, you're probably not thrilled with that message. You're not thrilled to hear that the Prime Minister might be prioritizing the needs of corporate Canada or corporate companies as opposed to that of workers. And so it's an opportunity for the Conservatives to, yes, seize the opportunity this creates with youth and the concerns around youth unemployment. It also creates an opportunity and an advantage, particularly as the NDP kind of struggled to get their house in order to talk about the importance of organized labor and providing those jobs for Canadians.
So, but Vandana, I wonder about this because the criticism of this program, obviously there's the stories of abuse and how people are taken advantage of, who come here from countries in need of employment, but also just that structurally it may drive down wages at the bottom end of the economy and the cheap supply of foreign labor also limits investment in business equipment and productivity. Not necessarily youth unemployment, though. But here we are. We're going to have this conversation most likely when Parliament returns next week, and the facts around it are kind of jumbly. It could be a flawed program, but it may not be flawed in a way that is causing the problem that scrapping it is intended to fix.
I think if you ask any Canadian across the country, do you think you should prioritize Canadians for jobs? Every single person will say yes, across partisan lines, right? I think the problem with this program, I think, is really just it's susceptible for a lot of misinformation. So companies have to prove that no Canadians want this job. I think there has to be an element of the same pay that they have to provide as well. So I think the problem is it's not easy enough for Canadians to understand, so therefore there's a lot of misinformation around it. So I think that's where we have to be careful about it. In terms of youth unemployment, to connect to that, I mean, I'm sitting here in Toronto, but I have a lot of young cousins from the ages of 18 and 25, and most of them aren't looking for jobs that traditionally use temporary foreign workers. When I think of when I was in government areas like berry picking, a lot of my cousins are looking for jobs in big companies, looking for internships, something they can leverage their post-secondary education for, not just here. So I don't think there's as a connection to youth unemployment. And I think the things that have connected to it in terms of international students, the government has already cracked down upon. There is significantly a lot less international students. We've seen post-secondary education, take that hit and have to not use that as a dedicated revenue stream. So I think in terms of combating this in the House, it's going to be clear for the Liberals to make sure they have a clear narrative around this and to make sure they can hit on misinformation. And I think, and then if they're able to do that and make it something easy to understand, I think they can be fine for the House, but also it gives them a place to talk about a youth strategy overall. We've been talking about tariffs so much, but they need to be able to do that as well.
Right. So Brad, we have seen the new Democrat Premier of British Columbia, David Eby, mostly agree with Pierre Poilievre, saying this program at minimum needs massive reform in his view. We know organized labor does not necessarily like it because of what it does for wages and these sorts of things. But what do you make of where this is going in this debate and sort of that fault line that maybe exists with Liberal voters?
Yeah, I think Poilievre has an ability to take very large, complex issues and break them down very simply. That is good retail politics, but it oversimplifies the ailment, right? Youth unemployment is a problem. Is it all temporary foreign workers? No. To your point, and you've had guests on last week talking about how international students have had an impact. There's other factors at play of youth unemployment, which Kate's right. Youth unemployment is at a crisis level. We've been banging this drum for a long time. New Democrats have been advocating for significant reform. Immigration Committee looked at this last Parliament. They were nibbling around the edges. The New Democrats called for an end to closed permit temporary foreign workers, where the individual employer is in charge of that individual that comes in, and everything about that individual's life is now in the hands of that one individual. And the UN's report this past last fall suggested that that is a sense of modern slavery. So there's some significant problems with this. And I think what David Eby was talking about was not only the temporary foreign workers reforms that he's been calling for in British Columbia, but also a larger immigration issue. You know, when the federal government sets the limits of individuals coming into this country, the provinces have to absorb it. It's an issue for housing. It's an issue on food banks. It's an issue on infrastructure like building schools and hospitals. And we've seen the tensions. You mentioned with Coletto about how the consensus is breaking down. It's true. I think this is a symptom of that. This is now going to be the pointed edge of that conversation about what are we doing as a country. Can our infrastructure, whether it's social or physical, keep up with the numbers that Mark Miller and Justin Trudeau were setting back when they were in charge of all this? And now we're playing catch up. Yeah. So what will the discussion be going forward? I think it's an opportunity to talk about youth unemployment, talk about whether or not post-secondary education institutions, and you and I, David, know this, we talked about this 20 years ago, when you start using international students as your cash cow, and bringing them in to offset the funding cuts that are coming from both levels, the provincial and federal governments. That is a fundamental problem, and now I think the chickens are coming home to roost.
Look, some of the colleges in Ontario, in particular, yes, on the international student thing, it was crazy. The rate of growth, the program expansion, and there's no housing built, no supports built, and it just had massive effects there. But we do have this new political debate emerging here, Rob, and one of the arguments in favor of the temporary foreign workers program is that it helps keeps costs down in a lot of big areas. And if you get rid of it, what does this do to the knock-on effects in affordability and other things, right? Like I know they talk about keeping the agricultural stream, so that food prices stay down.
If they didn't, I don't know who put food on my table. And if they don't have some sort of temporary foreign workers coming in, I'm not sure how we're going to build the 3.2 million homes that we're told that we need in order to get housing affordability back to where it's supposed to be in Canada. Look, I think it's time for a robust debate on this. Mark Miller called it a mess earlier this year when he had the immigration. So there's clearly some fixing that needs to be done here. At the same time, I look at what's happening in Britain. I look at what's happening in Germany. I look at what's happening in France. And right-wing parties, and I would say hard-right parties, are on the ascendancy there. Why? Because they're riding an anti-immigration wave. We're a country of immigrants in Canada. I think that immigration has generally been very, very good. I think it's true that the immigration consensus isn't frayed, as you said. It's broken. It's unraveled. And I think that the fault for that lies at the feet of the Trudeau government. That being said, a robust debate is a good idea. But let's make sure that we do this in a way that allows Canada to continue to build, particularly when we're talking about a prime minister that wants to build, and in a way that allows Canada to continue to do as it has for 150 years, very, very well by immigration.
So Kate, putting it in that bigger picture, debates over immigration. Obviously, you've got to discuss policy and suggest reforms, and bad programs need to be fixed, stopped, reformed. But to Rob's point, on the way, I was looking online today. The people don't know how to read data, and so they're looking at temporary foreign worker permits and saying 15 million people were let into the country over the last. No, that's like renewals on renewals and renewals, all being stacked on top of each other. Does pushing this too hard, while it may be good politics, does it potentially risk doing real damage, further damage to that immigration consensus if we get into a debate about it that just sort of makes any kind of immigration kind of politically toxic?
There are a couple of different issues here. There's the TFW problem in terms of suppressing wages, actively discouraging labor mobility across the country, and an overuse by employers of this program to try and get work done in a more cost efficient way for them. So that is what this is looking to address. Rob is quite right. There was for years an immigration consensus, and that fell apart from my perspective, largely because of the actions of the previous government. I think it's important for all parties to be very cautious and careful in how those conversations are handled and discussed. But you cannot really talk about the housing crisis or the healthcare crisis without also talking about immigration and how the over-immigration that has happened in this country is putting significant strain and pressure on those very foundations of Canadian society that people come to expect. And so the government has paid lip service to the fact that this is a problem. They've talked about bringing in, reducing those overall numbers, and the preliminary data suggests that they have blown past those already. So I think that the government's going to have to continue to challenge
said
itself.
population growth has basically stopped this year, though. The most recent numbers from Statistics Canada that the shutting down of these streams, I mean, it's essentially zero population growth right now. Like, I agree, it got out of control for a couple of years, but so far this year, the taps seem to be off.
The government is also showing immigration data in a different way. There was a period of several months there where, people were looking for this information. It could not be found, and it's now being shown differently. So I think that, the government has a challenge here, having relied on over immigration for so long, for so many years. I think this was the real difference maker, the silent difference maker in the 2015 election, the move away from economic migration toward family reunification. I think that brought a lot of people to the government side, particularly in vote-rich parts of the country like the GTA. Trying to unravel that for the Liberal government is going to be politically uncomfortable. And so it's important that we're debating these things based on facts, based on transparent information as provided, and making sure that information is provided. But I think that, you can talk about youth unemployment, the impact of TFWs on that, and other economic challenges we face, because it's not just TFWs for the reason of youth unemployment. Have that conversation, but there is a bigger challenge here around immigration and its impacts on housing and healthcare, for example, that can also be discussed.
Okay, yes, immigration, but, municipal councils, mayors, and provinces need to do a better job in a lot of these areas, especially on housing. And I'm going to give you the last word on this, and we're going to say goodbye.
To me, sorry.
Yes, sorry. I want to let you finish it off.
Yeah, I think we can talk about immigration. I think how we should talk about it is a way that doesn't affect our economy negatively. We do need people to come to the country. We need some jobs, like TFWs have been used to fill in labor gaps in core industries that's needed. But I think we do have to be careful. And the way we should talk about it is, how do we get immigrant success? People come to this country, they want to work hard, they want to get a job. So how does the government help support them? And if it means slowing down, which they have done, in order to make sure they have what they need to catch up with this economy, to survive in this economy, that will help. And that will also help keep from fueling on increased immigrant hate. We've seen increased hate to a lot of communities here, so we want to make sure we don't lead into that. So it has to be talked still with conscience, and it has to be talked about with emotion, and understand that people are leaving their homes for a reason. So how do we help support them in the best way possible while also supporting our economy?
Okay, we're going to have to let that be the last word for today. I'm sure we'll talk about this again. Vandana Cotter, Kate Harris.